Welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Mark Heffernan, and I've been a teacher now for 17 years. And I teach at a university in London, and this is David Byrne.
I have been a teacher for over 10 years now. I work for EC. I've been a teacher at EC, been a director of studies at EC, and now I'm the curriculum manager and the regional academic director for Europe and South Africa. And we also, both of us, write and manage a popular blog.
Today, we're going to talk to you a little bit about overt teaching, and we're going to try and examine what we mean by overt teaching. And then we're going to look at why we think it's so important and how you can maybe make your teaching more overt.
So as Mark said, we're going to explain what we mean by overt teaching. We'll make the case for adopting this approach and look at some practical ideas that you can bring into your classroom, all so that you can and you are ready to involve your students in the learning process, the learning discussion. So first of all, who are we and what is overt teaching? So you know who we are, but one of the things we work on together is our blog, Texploitation, and we've also co-written a resource book, Texploitation. And this is something that's happened over time. Myself and Mark met many years ago working at EC, and we both had a kind of a shared frustration with teachers having to pull from many different resource books and bringing in reams and reams of paper into class. Here's an exercise on this, here's a grammar point on this, here's this, and we felt there was another way of looking at it, that maybe a single text could be used for the entire lesson. After all, language occurs in context. Everything you need is within the text, the language, the skills, everything. So we started kind of developing this approach to teaching. It was how we taught, and we started kind of honing it by writing lessons on our blog. And something that kind of gradually revealed itself was it wasn't just the texts. It was what we were doing around the text. That was what kind of made Texploitation, I think, interesting from our point of view. It was the procedures we were writing to go along with the text. We were encouraging an overt approach to teaching. It wasn't just, here's a grammar point, here's this. It was engaging our students in a dialogue about why we're doing what we're doing. And this is the idea with overt teaching. It's to sort of, instead of it being a one-way street of the teacher presenting language or telling our students about a skill, it's encouraging more of a dialogue. It's bringing the students into the learning process and really putting them at the center. Now, one of the questions is, why should we do this? Well, as an answer to this, there's a very interesting man who I would really recommend you check out. He's got videos online. He's written a number of books, which we'll talk about later on. This is John Hattie. Now, John Hattie has been researching for years and years and years. He's researched countless numbers of lessons and involved teachers from all over the world. He has been measuring the effect that everything we do in the classroom has on learning. He wrote this book here, 10 Mind Frames for Visible Learning, boiling down all of his research into these 10 mind frames. One of them that really stuck out for us was this one here. I engage in dialogue as much as monologue. And for us, this is one of the keys. And this is why we sort of are suggesting you take a more overt approach. It's because in all this research, one of the largest effect sizes was engaging your students in dialogue. It's looking at feedback going both ways. It's making sure that students know what they're doing and why they're doing it and can talk about it. It's not just us controlling everything behind the curtain. It's throwing open that curtain, letting them in and involving them as much as possible. And we're going to talk throughout this talk how you can do that and some simple ideas for how you can do that. So let's kind of boil it down for us. What does a successful overt classroom mean to us? What does it look like? Well, we looked at it from the student's point of view, and we feel that They should know what they're learning. Fine. Okay, maybe we all agree with that. But more than that, they should know why they're learning it. And they should be able to tell you what and why they're learning. If your students can't talk about it, if they can't tell you, do they really know? Is it really real and relevant for them? And then we thought they should know what success looks like for them. So it's not just this is what we're learning. It's how will they know when they're successful? And different students might have different levels of success. Within one class, you will have lots of different abilities, lots of different even levels. So it's knowing for the student, what does success look like? It's being able to make decisions about that success. A student making decisions, it's giving them ownership. And again, it's this dialogue. They can talk about their own success. It's not us as the gatekeepers of success. It's not us saying, you did really well there. It's the student being able to self-assess, being able to peer assess, and being able to have that dialogue. In a successful overt classroom, these are the signs. These are what we're looking for. And again, we're going to talk about how we can get there. Now, for us, it all begins with why. Okay, so Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the question why?
I do. I think it's really interesting, the thing you just said there regarding students being able to peer assess, because I was just, before I came into this, teaching students, and one of the things I was asking my students at university to do today was to be able to peer assess. They're going to have to be able to look at each other's introduction paragraphs and give peer feedback on them. Why do we need them to be able to do things like this? Well, because it allows them to reflect on their own writing, to see differences, and also to be able to give advice. These are the sort of 21st century skills that quite often, as teachers, perhaps we've overlooked. But are we preparing our students just to be able to kind of complete gap fills, or are we actually giving them skills that they can take out and in an international context, use the language in a real situation? And I think, and I hope, that what we're increasingly trying to do is the latter, not the former. Why do they need to know what they're doing? Because they won't be able to apply what we're teaching unless we do. And there's a couple of examples from when we first spoke about overt teaching, which I think was 2017 or 2018. And to kind of prove our point, because we were doing a talk on TEFL about it, we went and did some action research, and we asked groups of students about the motivation for basic points in class. So that might be something like, why do we put you in pairs? Why do we ask you to do peer feedback? And pretty much universally, the answers that we got back were terrifying. They were not why we felt we were doing those things. And I think that really highlights that need for us as teachers to communicate the why. If we don't do that, it's demotivating for students, or they get the wrong idea. So why are we doing what we're doing? How is that going to help you? Where can you use it outside of the class? And we've kind of devised this roadmap to becoming overt. And there's going to be 3 stages to this that we're going to talk you through. But this opening one is all about the why. Why do we do this? Why do we feel that this is such a crucial part of your class? And we're going to look in the how, at how we get from us telling students why we're doing things to them being able to perhaps tell us.
What do you think might be a nice starting point for a teacher who wants to start asking the question why?
I think there's 2 ways of going about that. Firstly, you can just posit the question. So we've just done this reading exercise, and I highlighted some vocabulary for you. And why did I want you to be able to work out those words in context? And one of the things that might come out of that is that the teacher thinks, or so the students think, that the reason why is that actually we want them to learn those specific items of vocab. And that's certainly been something that we have seen in the past. When, of course, what we're actually looking to do is to develop that all-important, crucial skill. And unless that skill is developed, we've just taught them 8 words, and possibly 8 words that are not massively useful for them. So it's about letting the students know why. We're doing this not because these 8 words are the most crucial words for you. We're doing this because it will allow you to do this in the future. I think some people have estimated that there's nearly 500,000 words in English. A very good, fluent English speaker tends to have a vocab of about 30,000. This is a skill that most of us do naturally. We predict meaning from context. We might not know that one word, but the rest of the context and the co-text allows us to predict the meaning with a pretty high degree of accuracy. And a point on this, when we're learning this skill and when we're developing it, we make mistakes. Students will make mistakes too. Necessarily getting the answer right when developing a skill is not important. What's important is the thought process. But we won't get to understand that thought process unless we tell students why they're doing that. So we're doing this because we want you to develop the skill for these reasons. Therefore, what do you think this word means in this context? I think it means this. Interesting. Why do you think that? Because of this. Okay, that's a good guess, but unfortunately, that's not right. So establishing this why at the beginning is really important for any skills teaching, we think.
I think there's an interesting thing there, which is, Mark, you mentioned, initially we're telling the students why, we're not just giving them the activity, we're backing up with the why we're doing it. For me, one of the trickiest things as a new teacher was me knowing why. I'm not really sure I had a proper grasp of why I was doing everything. Maybe until, I really started thinking about it in my Delta. Now, I don't think people have to wait for their Delta to be asking that question. It's just something you're forced to do at diploma level. But I think it's something we should be forcing ourselves to do a lot earlier. I remember very early doors in my teaching career, I had 2 young Polish students. I think they were teenagers. And they, at the time, I would have thought they're challenging everything I do in my classroom. So what is this? And I was a bit, I thought this is a bit much. Every single thing we did, they said, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And my feeling was they're challenging me because they don't think it's worthwhile. Whereas when I started talking to them, I realized these guys just wanted to take part in the lesson. This was how they were engaging with the lesson. For them, the why was crucial. And I think, there was maybe an arrogance in me thinking, I planned this lesson for you. And, if you're demanding why we're doing it, that's, maybe challenging my authority as a teacher. And I just think, what a ridiculous approach for me to have taken, when really I needed to be engaging with those students and explaining why. And after a few lessons, when I started doing that, it became this beautiful discussion in the class and everyone got involved. And, the idea there is that it's not my lesson, it's our lesson. And I think also one of the reasons I felt challenged was because I didn't have the answers to why immediately. And I needed to go off and think about it. So one of the first things I would say is, before you get to discussing with your students why, have a look at your lesson plans, even if it's just the key stages, and you think why. Why am I doing this? What is my real aim for this? And how does it build towards my whole lesson? And gradually you will hone that skill, and through discussion with your students, hone it further. And one of the things you will always hear from us is little and often. This does not mean you are spending half your lesson explaining why or backing up your thought process or anything like that. But by doing it little and often, it raises awareness. And then those conversations happen much more quickly.
I think it's really key that why moves absolutely, as you say, from the teacher understanding why in the beginning to being able to explain that and not lecture about that. So that's key. Explaining it and then it becoming this open dialogue within a classroom where you can elicit. So what do you think was the purpose of that? That's interesting. My purpose was this, but actually you're right, because it could also be seen as that open dialogue. And as you say, it stops being my classroom, it becomes ours. And that's a really, really empowering thing for students as well, I think.
And I think, so the next stage on this is what we got from tick box to talking point. I feel there's so many things we do in our lessons that almost become tick boxes. We do them for many reasons. Maybe it's because we were told on our CELTA or whatever that this was something you should do. Maybe it's because our school has told us that this is something we do. Maybe it's because we have an inspection body that's told us this is something we should do. Behind all of those reasons is a clear why. We might not necessarily be aware of it, but there's always a clear why. No inspection body will tell you to do something unless there is a clear why behind it. Same with the school, same with the CELTA or whatever. So what we want to do is take some of these key talking points or tick boxes and move them into effective talking points. For us, the biggest one is aims and objectives. Now, I have observed many lessons over the years. We both have. And I think for me, it's obviously it starts with the aims and objectives. If they're not right, that's going to set your whole class off, because if you don't necessarily know where you're going, if your students don't know where you're going, it becomes a kind of a mishmash of stuff as opposed to a cohesive lesson.
And I think it's really important to start with this idea of aims, because I don't think in any teaching there is a better example of tick box than aims, because multiple times when I was observing, one of the criteria that you're looking at were aims and objectives on the board. It's a classic kind of lesson observation. Like, well, yes, they are. So I can tick that box. But are they actually meaningful aims? And this is what David's going to explore, moving them from being today we will look at the future to something more usable. So hopefully today we will be able to sort of tick all of these aims that we've explained the meaning of overt. We've made the case for it. But the key point here is this bottom one. So as David's talking, think about so that you are able to. That's really what we're trying to do. That's our outcome. So aims and outcomes are crucial. David.
And so we sort of have two strategies to making aims and objectives effective, first of all, before you can even move to the talking point. But first, you really need to think of who are they for? They cannot just be because you were told to do it. They are an effective tool for you and for your students. They have to speak to your students. As Mark said, if I'm observing and I can see them up there, but I can see that nobody in the class is aware of them or has looked at them or that they're not being used, then they are not effective. So the first thing is to make sure there is a clear pattern. Now, I've always gone with, today we are going to aim, so that you are objective. You have to have that clear pattern so that students are aware when they look at it, they can navigate it quite easily. If you're changing how you do it, that can be quite off-putting. It can be more difficult to get them in.
It's disorienting, isn't it? I think the point is with language learning, the content should be the tricky part, not the kind of the shape.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things that creative teachers, and I think I would include myself in that, we often like to play around with shape because, hey, there might be a better way. And actually, what we're probably doing is we're testing things out for ourselves, not necessarily for the merit and benefit of our students. So I think, yes, formula can be very, very useful for students as long as the content is challenging.
And I think this might be something that's set by your school. Absolutely fine. Stick to it. It might be something that is set by your school, but you can put your own slant on it. Like, it will always be the first slide. It will always be this color. It will always have this picture of a dartboard. Whatever it is, some clear signs, some positive habits so that they go, bump, this is the aims and objectives. This is what we do. There always has to be more than just aims, more than just things that you're going to tick off. We have to be building towards a real life objective, and it has to be tangible. It can't be speaking or something quite vague like that. Now, if you have these two things, you are now ready to talk about it. You're now ready to discuss it. So an aim and objective doesn't just go on the board. It is something you put on the board and it becomes a dialogue. It's not just you saying monologue, this is what we're going to do, and everyone sort of blankly watching you. It has to be this dialogue. They have to engage with it or it is not effective. So one way of doing it is just simple questions. I'm not saying all of these questions are necessary every day, but maybe one or two of these questions. So How will this help you in your real life, making it relevant for them? Which of these will be more challenging for you? One of the biggest stumbling block to an effective lesson can be students looking at aims and objectives going, I know that, I know that, I know that, I don't need this lesson, it's too easy. And suddenly, effective filters are up and everything like that. So which of these will be challenging for you? Which of these are you already confident with? And is there anything else you'll need to learn? So maybe in order to do this objective effectively at the end, is there something we're missing here? Is there something that we're taking for granted that you feel you would like to add to the lesson? So it brings in that kind of element of negotiation. Now, this is something great, should be the beginning of every lesson, but also it needs to you need to make sure you are setting it up right, that it has to be effective. Now, here's an example of something that you won't be able to talk about. Grammar, past tenses, vocabulary, countryside vocabulary, skills, speaking and reading. And this is real aims that I took from an observation that I did a while back. How can we talk about this? We can't. What are they really going to say beyond, I know past tenses, countryside vocabulary is vague. Why are they doing this? What speaking skill? What reading skill? What are they better at by the end? There's nothing tangible. Same again with if it's just a list, present perfect, past simple, should, activities, vocabulary. Where are we going with this? So those two strategies, the real life objective and the clear pattern, can take something like this into the realms of talking point. So let's take this second one, the aims, present perfect, past simple, should, activities, vocabulary. Let's turn that into something effective. Today, we're going to learn to ask questions about experience. Now, you'll notice here, the real life aim, the real function gets pride of place. The grammar point comes second. Great, students want to know that they're working on grammar, that they're developing. This is something that they can see, but we want to focus on the function. We're learning to give details about an experience, past simple. We're learning vocabulary for activities. We're learning to give advice so that you can ask for and give recommendations for someone new in a city. So now this is something we can talk about. Now we can say, how will this help you in your real life? Which of these are you confident with? Oh, I've studied present perfect, but not really the question, so I kind of know it. I know past simple already, but maybe giving advice is new for me. It becomes a dialogue. When are you going to do this? With new students coming into the class every single day, every single week, this is going to be really useful for me. With me traveling next month, this is going to be really useful for me. So how will this help you in your real life? And then we need to keep them talking. Because as soon as you finish this and moved on to the first activity, it's out of their mind. So you got to keep bringing it around, making them see that it is an effective tool. So throughout the lesson, after you've done an activity, how is this going to help you reach your objective? It wasn't just a unit we did, it was building towards something bigger. Why did we do this? Back to Mark's question of why. So we just learned vocabulary for activities. Why? So that you can give recommendations about activities in a city. Yes.
Can I just come in here on this importance of function over form? My best example that I can ever give for the importance of function is conditionals. Almost all students I've ever met, almost regardless of level, can give me the form of the conditionals. None of them, or very, very few of them, ever use them before high upper and advanced, not naturally. And it's because they don't know why. They know the grammar. So, I mean, an exercise I used to do is, okay, give me one everyday usage of this first conditional structure that you've just parroted to me. And students tend to sit there and be like, if you want to negotiate, first conditionals are great. If you want to be a gangster, first conditionals are wonderful. If you don't pay me the money, we will kill you. There are real examples of this language all around. But unless we explain the function of the language as we teach it, and we move away from today, we will look at first conditional to today, we will look at how you make a plan using a conditional. If you finish work, we can meet at 5. Okay, I will pick you up at this time if you're ready. These types of uses of language, that they can then go and use in their daily life, and that rob it and take it away from that pure, listing of grammar. Because I can't be the only one that has been frustrated by students' ability to kind of repeat form back to me, but never use it. So it's so crucial to engage in these types of aims and then engage in this type of dialogue if we want to leave that type of kind of learning experience for the students behind.
And I think it really extends the life of language points, doesn't it? Like the number of times that, present perfect, we did it. But
I've done present perfect now.
Did it. Yeah, finished, did it. But so many functions, so many uses, so many reasons to revisit it as a single point on the way to an objective.
It makes a spiral syllabus so much more valid if we're having these conversations. So by spiral syllabus, all language learning effectively is on this type of path, because as we know as teachers, we don't just teach present simple in beginners and elementary and never see it again. We return to it for good reason. The present simple is probably the hardest tense. So interesting that we start with it. But yeah, as David said, it helps extend and give validity to us returning to those points. From a student's perspective, we know that there's validity.
So with your aims and objectives, get them into a nice format, get them something that they recognize, and then have it as a talking point throughout, beginning to end. And we'll be returning to these in a minute to talk about the end of the lesson as well. So we've done stage 1, stage 2. Mark, we're into stage 3. Do you want to talk to us about success?
Yeah. So this is David sort of hovered over this near the beginning, and I think he talked about students having different levels of success. And I think it's worth focusing on the fact we all know that within a class there is a range, but not just a range of kind of ability levels within the class. Most students have what we would describe as a spiky profile. They have areas where they're more confident. There are a lot of students, for example, who maybe talk very well, but they don't necessarily produce that in writing. There are students who have exactly the opposite. There are students who are really good grammatically, but perhaps have a lower lexis. And allowing this discussion of what success looks like for each individual student allows us to tailor it and not be marking or assessing all students from the same point of view. It also hands over this huge chunk of autonomy to students. Now, some students can be resistant to that at first because, well, you're the teacher, you're the expert. However, if we're trying to create autonomous learners that can self-govern their learning and decide where they put their focus based on what their needs are, we need to have these conversations. So look, your speaking is very good, but it's easy for you to keep just speaking. What you need to perhaps do with your speaking skills is look at something like turn taking. You tend to monopolize conversations. So for you, success in this might be inviting other people to join in. It might be aiming to use vocab that goes beyond. I remember years and years ago, so I think probably around about 2006, 7, I was teaching an absolutely wonderful CPE class. They were fantastic students. They were brilliant. And we were just doing, practice exams. And this is in the old days before mobile phones, but I dragged a huge, great big tape player into class to record their speaking. So let's just record you and see what language you're using. Bearing in mind, for CPE, you're expected to use a wide range of vocab and grammar. And pretty much all of them just used present simple throughout their entire 5-minute monologues. Like, well, that's natural, but unfortunately, for the exam, you're going to need to show a wider context. Let's look at how we can do that. What can we do to make that happen? And they were all totally shocked because they were fluent. Their pronunciation was, by and large, pretty strong. But it's about assessing what success is for each individual student in each context. And by doing this on an activity level and on an overall class that day level, we allow for these differences. We allow for, okay, this is what I'm going to be working on. I'm setting myself this target. And then they can assess whether they made it or not. And, they can assess where they need to work more. So this lovely kind of things that David's put up here of the different places that they can assess. They might decide they need to work on them all. They might decide that actually, for me personally, expanding vocab use. I tend to just use the same couple of adjectives. What else could I use here? Giving them the right to say what's good and what's not. And this all comes back to Hattie and success criteria. I think one way of looking at why it's so important is lots of students in my time teaching and my time kind of managing in language schools have always said they found exam classes more challenging. And I think what they mean is that there was a measurable outcome of success. The implication being that a general English class didn't have a measurable outcome of success. By incorporating success criteria into every class that we're doing and giving them the choice, we create a measure of success for the students. And we possibly avoid that intermediate plateau, which we've all seen, where students think they're not learning, because it's very hard to see learning at intermediate level and advanced level in comparison to a beginner. As a beginner, one day you learn an entire new tense that now enables you to talk about the past. Yesterday, you only lived in the present. Now you have 2 times that you can discuss. As an intermediate student, you probably have all the functional language you need to get by in a country. So there are none of those cataclysmic, life-changing bits of language that you learn that suddenly a door is open to you. It is more about these more nuanced improvements in functionality and explaining that to students and opening for them, okay, these are the things that you could do to improve this. Which of these do you want to aim for in this class? And you're assessing yourself. How well did you do? Obviously, as teachers, we will continue to do this. But I think it's important that students see their own agency in this.
I think so. You're like Mark's mentioned there that we do this in exam classes, and we do. But the reason I think it's something that's so prevalent and so accepted in exam classes is because the work's been done for us. There is an exam board who's told us what they're looking for in each activity, so we know what success for that activity is. Now, one of the stumbling blocks, one of the challenges for a teacher coming to success criteria new is, how do I write them? How do I get them into the class? Now, it all begins with the aims and objectives, and it all begins with those 2 kind of criteria we gave you. Make sure that they're real life, and make sure that they have a pattern. Once you have that, it becomes, number 1, a discussion with your students. This is the conversation that you're going to have, ask for and give recommendations. What does a successful version of the conversation look like? And if students have been discussing their aims and objectives throughout, they will know that they will have to use present perfect. They will have to use past simple to describe their experience. They'll have to do A, B, C, and D. Essentially, the success criteria is what you have taught them in the class to get to this objective. It could also be, here's a model, because very often we will introduce language and skills, grammar, with a conversation, a model. It will be, why was this successful? Or if we give a bad model, why was this unsuccessful? And that conversation becomes the success criteria. It doesn't have to be something that you necessarily write for them. It could be negotiated and discussed with them as part of the lesson.
And the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that we did provide both a good and a bad model for aims and objectives earlier. And I think models they're so key. If students don't know what a good example is, how can they produce it? It's not all about just the product they produce at the end, but knowing where they're trying to get is a pretty crucial start. And as a teacher who teaches and spends a lot of their time at university teaching writing, producing bad models is wonderful. Demonstrating to students, where things don't work and why they don't, and allowing them to kind of examine it. It's crucial. Why is this an unsuccessful conversation? What went wrong? Getting them to think about these things is really, really crucial. And it's so easy nowadays. You don't have to lug tape players up to the 5th floor of an old building. You can just use phones. Phones are wonderful.
Or if, students can assess themselves with phones, but using success criteria allows for kind of objective feedback. Most of the time when we ask peers to give each other feedback, it tends to be, yeah, I really liked it. Yeah, or that was interesting. So it's on content as opposed to what the language or skills they've used, which is completely normal because feedback is a difficult skill that we have to develop and hone over years. Asking our students to do it overnight is that's next nigh impossible. So giving them the means to do it means they're focused. It's everything they've learned in the lesson. It can be clear. You were supposed to use the present perfect to check where people have been. You didn't. You used the past simple. It becomes a conversation. And that's what we want, moving them again from tick box to talking point. It's not just something you put up there because you feel you should. It has to be a discussion. So we have to link the whole lesson together. What have we learned today that will help you have this conversation successfully? Boom, you've got your success criteria. Maybe we listen to the model, good or bad. Did they do these things? We're helping them to assess. We're training them to give feedback by showing these models next to the success criteria. Which one of these, or will you focus on all of them, as Mark said, or will you focus on one of them specifically? And then that guides feedback. If I've said I'm only going to focus on present perfect to check where people have been, you cannot give me feedback on past simple. I've said what I'm focusing on. But the beauty is, what will I focus on next time? One of the hardest things I've ever found is encouraging students to repeat an activity. Right? We did it. With these, you can show that there's other areas to look at. You looked at A, B, and C. Now I want you to focus on D. You tick those ones. You're great with those. You're successful. Now we're focusing on D. Let's try
to say
this.
What David's just said as well. I used to have a kind of lesson that really, it was an editing lesson, and that needed explaining to students because it took the form of they had to make a 1 or 2 minute news story that was recorded on their phones. And initially, they would record it and be like, okay, how was your pronunciation? How was your connected speech? Fine. And then the second stage would be, was there any vocab that you would upgrade if you were to do it again? Okay, maybe have a go at doing it again. And then listening again now, could you spot any mistakes with your grammar? So it was this building, returning to an activity to perfect it. Because I think all of us have an intrinsic kind of, personally me, if I'm writing an article, I don't like to have to keep returning to it, but I know I have to. And that's a skill that they're going to be able to take with them into their working lives and their future studies. But from our language perspective, it's giving them different criteria to focus on. And obviously, the last stage of that would be, is there anything else in there that you want to focus on, that you want some advice on? And so this seemingly simple activity would end up taking quite a lot of time because of the handing over to the students of basically self-assessment, letting them be the person that works out what's good and what's bad and where exactly they want to put their focus.
This brings us back to at the very beginning, when we started with textploitation, it was born out of this frustration of saying, I've got 3 hours, I'm going to bring in all this stuff, because what happens if I run out of material? This kind of common, especially for a new teacher coming in, that is a real fear. I remember that fear. I remember sweating coming to the end of an activity going, I got nothing left. This is where you put your focus. It's not about covering stuff. It's about discussing learning, about making it a dialogue. And this is time well spent. It's not, I've got 10 minutes left, so let's just do these phrasal verbs. It is, here is you owning and discussing your own learning. And these, again, it's not do everything all the time, but it's little and often. It's having little conversations about these. And as we said, it enables something beautiful, which is peer feedback. Because we cannot be everywhere, much as we would love to be. We can only ever hear a small percentage of what's happening in the class at once. So as Mark said, recording is beautiful because it allows you to then listen to something later on, or writing, but also think about your students in tripods, in 3s instead of 2s. And one of them is always listening to the conversation with the success criteria. It gives them a clear role, and then move it around. The other 2 are talking and someone else is giving feedback.
And by doing that, you're modeling as well, aren't you? And you're hopefully with each stage upgrading the model.
So our roadmap, each one, you can't just jump in at the end, I wouldn't say. Each one takes you through it. First of all, you need to be thinking, why are you doing things? Because if you don't know why, you can't write your aims and objectives, and then you can't do this. You need to be discussing why with students so they're used to these small conversations. You then take your aims and objectives and you move it from tick box to talking point. You make sure this is something embedded in your class. And then once you have effective aims and objectives, it's very easy to move from that to success criteria and making that a talking point. Students are already used to, by stage 3, they're used to talking about why, they're used to talking about learning, because you've moved through stage 1 and stage 2. The question, I suppose, for you guys will be, where are you? Are you right at the beginning? Are you doing things in class, but you're not quite sure why? Are you doing things you know why, but your students don't know why? Do you know why, but you're not talking about it? Are you talking about why, but you're not taking that last part and talking about success? Where are you, and what are you going to do? Some things out there that you might want to look at. Obviously, our blog and our book, this is in the procedures. Every lesson comes with a teaching tip, and it comes with procedure that talks you through why we're doing things. It's not just do this, do this, do this. It's you're doing this because it's going to help with this. And that can really help in the beginning when you're just trying to get into that mindset. It's interesting. I love this book, Voices. It's brand new from National Geographic. I really like it because for me, it's the beginning of a shift where we're seeing conversations appear on the page, especially with skills. They're discussing the why on the page, why you might want to learn this, why this is important. So it's nice to start seeing those discussions appear in the course books, especially we know, space on the page is one of the biggest challenges to any course book writer or editor. So it's lovely to see that importance being put in it. But really, Hattie, if you are interested in this, the 10 mind frames for visible learning, well, it starts with visible learning. That's his research. He boils that down into the 10 mind frames, which is really, really nice. Some lovely tips, some lovely ideas, and it really brings it into what it looks like in a classroom, what it maybe effective and ineffective looks like in a classroom. Very narrative focused, so easy to get involved with. My favorite.
Also, lots and lots of fantastic videos on YouTube that you can get for free.
Yes.
Same as with us, the blog is that you don't have to buy the book. It's nice if you do.
Always good if you do. And my personal favorite is this one, Visible Learning Feedback. If you are interested in the importance of and how to give effective feedback and use success criteria and aims and objectives, this book is just absolutely amazing. John Hattie and Shirley Clark. So do check them out. And obviously,
and I think actually Shirley Clark was the first person to talk properly about this, because I think she comes from a mainstream education background, and they have been doing this far more for a lot longer.
This is it. It's in K-12. This is the norm. Learning objectives, success criteria. So this is not just for adults. This is not just for ELT. This is education in general. Kids are out there using success criteria effectively, so we can bring it into our young learner classes. We can bring it into our adult classes. I see that in undergrads, definitely. Yeah. I think we need to catch up in many ways.
Yeah.
And obviously, galleryteachers.com, many interesting, wonderful resources there for you guys to get involved with.
Well, if we take it out of the nutshell, overt teaching is primarily being open about the stages and the aims of a lesson with the student, being open about why we do something and what we hope the students will be able to achieve by us doing that. So it's unpacking the lesson. It's removing the Wizard of Oz element of teaching. We're no longer trying to hide our intentions. We're being open about exactly what we're doing and what we hope the students can do as a result of us having done that. So each stage is unpacked for the students.
For us, it begins with why. We need to know why we're doing, not just what we're doing. It can't just be, oh, this is a really interesting lesson or article. It has to be, why are you doing it? What are they better at by the end? Why are you doing this running dictation? How does it lead towards your goal? So you need to be asking yourself this question, why am I doing it? And if you can't answer it, Maybe then that will lead to a discussion with your director of studies, with your peers, and gradually sort of learning why and honing and discussing it. And then once you know why, you're bringing that into the classroom, because your students need to know why. It can't just be, we're doing this reading now, and now we're doing this listening. It has to be, we're doing this reading because we're working on reading skills, or because we want you to engage with the content, or because we want to pull out the language from it, or all three. But if students know why they're doing it, they can then focus. They are prepared to learn. So we think everything begins with why, and it starts with you and then bleeds into your students.